Rafi, just to pick up on my last comment, which is front page of the Wall Street Journal today, says that the assault by Hamas is rewriting the rules in the Middle East. And it dovetails into what you were saying in terms of this heightened geopolitical risk out there right now that's not reflected in the price of WTI, which normally, currencies, treasuries, commodities would see that reflection. So you actually think that the commodity prices is not pricing in the security risk that is actually going on right now. And we should talk a little bit about that in terms of the security risk for who? The developed nations as well.
Yeah, I mean, we do, in fact, take that quite seriously. And we are, as a result, looking at it more like, I guess the way to look at it is you have to try to understand what's your downside if you're wrong. You got to remember, you're talking about a very emotional issue here. And I'm looking at it from a financial perspective of investing. And you have to take the emotion out of it and the right and wrong of it all. And you have to say, what is it creating from an investment perspective? We've got a bunch of capital at work in this sector, and these geopolitical issues are affecting our lives today. No different than how Canadian politics for the last 5 years have been affecting the energy industry. And we have to pay attention to politics as it affects the investment. You have to address these geopolitical issues, not in an emotional perspective, but from a, what does it mean financially? And we would say that
To be clear, when you're looking at investments, to be clear.
Yeah, right. And when we look at it right now, we say there's an enormous risk to putting capital to work in a way that would imply that all of this is going to subside in the Middle East. And the oil price is acting as if that's the case too. And so we're looking at it the opposite way. We think there's more risk doing it that way. There's less risk in assuming this is going to get heated up and worse. And that's how we're positioning our capital. We don't think the commodities or the market is handling it that way.
And so from a supply perspective, what is it that you see playing out potentially?
So obviously it's a very complex area of transportation for oil through the Strait of Hormuz. And if you start to heat up other areas, whether it's Lebanon and Lebanon brings in Iran and Iran brings in, and does Saudi finally say something about what's going on and how they feel about it? And there's a lot of awareness in the Middle East around the sensitivity of the movement of that oil. A simple stat I always try to remind people of that's important that we should all understand, and the importance of that oil movement. In the developed world, we produce 30 million barrels of oil, but we consume 46 million. So we are incredibly dependent on the movement of that oil. And tension and war could curtail that and create great strife for us, an energy crisis that could spiral us into a huge economic situation here.
The other interesting stat, we should talk a little bit about the demand for oil. Some of the stats are quite staggering in terms of the usage per person per year in Canada and the United States versus some of the developing world. Can you give us a little bit of perspective on that?
Well, I mean, it's just there's always data coming out about the demand for oil, and the demand for oil is always looked at globally. And we separate it into the developed world and the undeveloped world. And the developed world that has all of these amenities and healthcare and transportation and a middle class and all the freedoms that we feel and enjoy and the safety that comes with it. And on average, the developed world uses 14 barrels a day, 14 barrels per year per person. In the developing world, it's more like 3 barrels on average. In Canada and the US, we're even more egregious, and we're using about 21 barrels per person. And when you take China, well, you take India and Africa, they're using 1.3 barrels. And there's such a huge population that you just give them refrigeration. And when you times it by the population, it's a massive growth in demand. And are we not going
We'll
to
take a quick
provide
break.
that for them? That
We'll
just
be
seems
right back.
unfair.